This is Flight Training the Way I See It with Mike Schiffler. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode, the September 2025 video podcast of Flight Training the Way I See It with your host, Mike Schiffler. We talk about flight training, we talk about what's happening at CFI Bootcamp, and we talk about training, flight training. So let's get into it here. This is the last week of September of 2025. And of course, we got changes coming next month for Mosaic, but we'll leave that till next month. We've already done a few segments on that. Don't forget to join our power hours. So we do 1 hour free show every Saturday from noon until 1 Eastern time. And you can go to our website, cfibootcamp.com, and you can find a link there to register for the power hours. We've done 255 of them. It's a lot of them. And this week's topic, assuming with the newsletter out in time, would be on pilot qualifications for commercial pilots. And we're going to have Rod Machado on October the 11th of 2025, and he's going to be talking about 50 years of landings, what he's learned to teach other people to land. So that'd be a good show as well. Okay, without further ado, let's get into it. The topics we're going to cover are the Private Pilot ACS SmartStudy Pro is done. Our product is done. Its release is imminent. The second thing we'll talk about is here. Work begins now on CFI Bootcamp SmartStudy Pro for IFR. Ooh. So that's a new project for us. We are taking the IFR ACS and we are narrating it and explaining it. So we'll get there when we get there. That's one thing we're going to talk about. Then we're going to talk about an AC, the AC for endorsements, AC 61-65 Juliet's going to be replaced with the Kilo version, 6165 Kilo, on October 22nd, 2025, and we'll go through what's being changed there on that. Then we'll also talk about the Sport Pilot test standards, and they are not ACSs. Sport Pilot is not ACS, so we're going to talk about where you'd find that, because that's going to be a thing here soon. More people are going to be coming in to that level of certificate. So you need to know some things about it that you maybe didn't know before. And then, of course, we're going to have 3 pro tips for you. So let's get going. All right, let's talk about our stuff first for a few minutes. We have a new product called the Private Pilot ACS SmartStudy Pro. It's designed to be listened to in your car or places where you can't watch video. Now, I did record video with it, so that's there, but you don't have to have it. I designed it so that it could just be audio. So this course explains what you need to know about each knowledge, risk, and skill element in the Private Pilot ACS, all of the tasks. There are 45 of them. The course is around 11 hours. 10 hours and something. And there's also companion PDF guides for each task that contains images, notes, other relevant information that you can use when you're in position to be able to do it. So this would work really well on your drive up to the airport or after a lesson for a comprehensive review and study session. It's also really effective for you when you're preparing for the oral exam of your check ride, because it's going to cover everything in the ACS, right? All the knowledge, all the risk elements, and all the skills. Now, this course was designed by me. I wrote it and I narrated it. And I'm a former FAA pilot examiner and also Civil Aviation Authority examiner in the UK. And I think you could benefit from what I have to say about the knowledge, risk elements, and skills. Now, when this thing's released, it's going to be on our website. And you get an email if you're on this newsletter list about how to get it. Okay, the second item, kind of like this, kind of related, is work's beginning on our new IFR ACS SmartStudy Pro. So it's the same idea. We're taking the IFR instrument rating airplane ACS, and we're narrating what you need to know about all the knowledge elements, all of the risk management elements, and all the skills. Now, again, it's an audio presentation, but it does have video with it. And there are companion PDFs for each of the tasks. Now, there are currently 20 tasks in the instrument rating ACS, so less than half of the number of tasks in the private pilot one. So we're hoping we can blast this thing out here in a couple weeks. And the editing should go a lot smoother as well, because there's so much less to do. Should be around 6 hours, 5 hours in this region. Currently, I've done about 7 narrations, 7 tasks, and they're in editing right now, and we're expecting it to be available late October, just in time for the holidays. So if you're looking to do an instrument rating or maybe a CFII, this would be something for you. Okay, now let's get into the rest of it here. Stop talking about us, they say. Stop talking about CFI Bootcamp. Tell me something other useful that I don't have to think about buying. Okay, I will. Uh, the AC 6165 Juliet is going to be replaced with AC 6165 Kilo on October 22nd, 2025. So if you don't know what those are flight instructors' guides to endorsements, right? The FAA's recommended endorsement. On October 22nd, the FAA is going to publish the final rule that affects sport pilot certification on airplanes and aircraft, all things, but I'm just making it airplane centric here. It's referred to as Mosaic, modernization of a special airworthiness certificate. You're probably tired of hearing about it, but I'm just going to talk about the ACs. Don't worry. We're not going to clutter this up. Because many of the regulations are being changed and some new ones added, the AC that addresses the endorsements, which is currently AC 6165 Juliet's being updated. It is now 6165, so 61-65 Kilo. It's in draft form, and you can get it at FAA.gov. You can just Google AC space 61-65 Kilo draft, and you'll find it. Now, that will be until October 22nd, at which time it won't be draft anymore. It'll be the real deal, and the other Juliet will be gone. Most of the changes appear in the sport pilot section of the AC. For example, the endorsements for recommending a pilot and subsequent evaluation, as well as the endorsement for a proficiency check, have been modified. The new rule will no longer allow a proficiency check to add sport pilot privileges for an airplane or helicopter category or class. The rest of the categories and classes are still okay to do in that same way, which was using two CFIs, one to do the training and the other to do the proficiency check. And this is if you had a sport pilot certificate already or higher. Additionally, there's new endorsements for the expanded privileges that sport pilots and higher rated pilots operating under those rules will be eligible for. So there's a night endorsement to allow a sport pilot to fly at night. That does require that you have a third class medical or basic med. The other stuff just requires a driver's license. There's also an endorsement for retractable gear airplane, variable pitch propeller airplane, and simplified flight controls endorsement for each make and model. So those are going to be unique. The push button flying basically is coming your way. And the regulations were built in such a way that when that happens, they're already there. All the regulations for sport pilot privileges for that are there in this new rule. There are other administrative changes to existing endorsements due to changes in specific FAR numbers or subparts within an FAR in the sport pilot section. So you can get that at FAA.gov, and you can contrast maybe AC 61-65 Juliet, the current one, with AC 6165 Kilo, which is the one that's going to be in draft, or it is in draft now, the one that will be effective in October. Okay, and have a look at those. It's nice because the FAA puts a black sidebar next to what they made changes to, so you can kind of easily find that. And I believe there's in the end of it, I think there's an appendix that addresses the summary of changes in the document. So that's quite handy to have. Okay, and because the sport pilot stuff is going to become more relevant here soon, people are digging around and saying, hey, I can't find the sport pilot ACS. And in case you're looking for that. So you want to kind of get ready for it. What is it going to do? What can I do? Would I recommend this to anybody? And if so, how would it be tested? Well, it's because there isn't one. The sport pilot is covered under a practical test standard, still a PTS. So if you don't know what a PTS is, before the creation of the Airman Certification Standards, all test standards were PTSs, practical test standards. Currently, there are a few that never received an upgrade, and the sport pilot is one of them. And because now all of the ACSs and PTSs have been incorporated by reference into FAR 61.14 by name and by number, it will probably require the FAA to go through the process of rulemaking to make it into an ACS or to change any of that. Currently, rulemaking takes a lot of time and a lot of FAA resources to accomplish. Now, the verdict is still out on whether an expedited process can be established for changes to ACSs and PTSs, sort of bypassing or doing a small version of rule changes. There is a provision for rulemaking that allows an emergency to have an immediate effect. You can publish the rule straight away, or things that don't really affect other rules or don't really have the weight that maybe some of these things would have if it were regulation about maybe about a special use airspace or some new thing like that, where things would have to be considered. Like Mosaic, that whole thing took 10 years to come out of rulemaking. So we don't want a change to an ACS or PTS to take 10 years. And if they can establish that it really doesn't affect much, it's a minor change, then they may be able to work around the rulemaking. But we'll see. That's what's being talked about. Now, unlike an ACS that has a knowledge section, risk, and skill elements section, those three sections. So knowledge is what you need to know, risk is what you need to consider, and skill is what you need to do. And that's for every task. The PTS only has items listed and they're to be tested orally and in flight. There's no distinction made there. So there's no division between knowledge and skills, and risk management is only stated to test, but not exactly what. In the ACS, it's very clear what has to be tested for risk and taught. Additionally, there is a special emphasis list of items that the FAA seems critical, it deems critical, I should say, in the PTS that are in the front matter. There's usually between 13 and 16 of them. Things like controlled flight into terrain, positive change of flight controls, use of checklists, things of that nature. So if you're planning on working with sport pilots, take some time to review the sport pilot practical test standards available at FAA.gov. And now we're going to look at some pro tips, some different ones here. One is quite different. It's the first one. If you haven't used ChatGPT, try it. It's a new AI platform that's been around for a little bit that can be very helpful to create quizzes and outlines. I use it to create outlines for many things. I use it to create quizzes sometimes, and it's very powerful. You can use this AI app called ChatGPT, which you can download for free, to help you with day-to-day flight instruction tasks. So you can have it create an outline, for example, on what should be taught, maybe on a specific autopilot, like the GFC 700, maybe an avionics package, and so on, to give you a list of things and some content, maybe some images behind that you can then work up into a presentation of your own. You can also use it to make quizzes. You just upload a manual or a POH of some sort and prompt it to create a quiz of a particular length, like 50 questions, with a specified number of possible multi-choice responses, references, correct answers, explanations, and more. It can save a ton of time. So, as an example, if you have ChatGPT, you can just type in create a pre solo knowledge test for like student pilots of 50 questions that will satisfy FAR Part 61.87 parentheses Bravo and include questions about the airspace and procedures for fill in the blank, but I said Palo Alto Airport. Make this a multiple choice quiz with three possible answers. And it will create that. And it's pretty close. It actually does a pretty good job of it. So I think you should give that a go. I think you might find even better uses for it. If you do, let me know what use you found for it. We had one of our students in the last CFI class from Germany that did some programming within ChatGPT, and he created something we're going to collaborate with. He uploaded all of the FAR. He uploaded that for flight instructor, airplane, anything we could do, all the books, all the handbooks, all manuals, various things. And then he said, "I'm going to ask questions about from a flight instructor's perspective. So I would like the answer to be from that perspective, and I would also like how I would frame the question for a DPE who was giving me an oral examination." And it's quite powerful. The things that he was able to do went very quickly. He also programmed it with his own personal minimums, with the airplane's profiles, and for risk management to help with cross-country flight planning. So this stuff is coming, and the sooner you get your head around it, the better off you're going to be, because it's going to be part of many things. It's going to be part of our automation systems in the future, along with navigation, dispatch planning, all that's coming. So I use it quite often. All right, next pro tip is start thinking of the throttle as a flight control. Basic, no ChatGPT here. Many pilots don't keep their hand on the throttle during maneuvering or takeoff or taxi. This is a mistake. When your hand isn't on the throttle, you aren't getting the entire picture of what's going on. For example, if your hand isn't on the throttle during takeoff, the throttle may slip back and reduce power, or you may be slow to close the throttle and abort a takeoff. The same is true when maneuvering. You want to be engaged in the maneuver with elevator, aileron, rudder, and power. Taxiing is another place where your hand belongs on the throttle. If it's not there, you're setting an arbitrary amount of throttle, which leads to riding the brakes and changing speeds when encountering a slope, like in a taxiway, among other things. So I would keep my hand on the throttle. The other hand, by the way, goes on the control wheel, so the wind doesn't pick the flight controls up, the control surfaces, and bang them against the stops. Okay, our last pro tip, something you maybe haven't considered if you're a CFI especially, get your advanced ground instructor certificate as soon as you can. good things await. So many ask, why would I want this advanced ground instructor certificate, right? I already have a CFI, or what would I do with it if I wasn't a CFI? Well, to start, you can get it before you become a private pilot. You can take it anytime. You don't have to be a pilot to have this certificate. You have to take two tests, the FOI, Fundamentals of Instructing, and the Advanced Ground Instructor Knowledge Test. Now, when those are passed, you complete the IACRA application and you find a DPE or an ASI, an FAA inspector, to issue the certificate. Before you can use the certificate, however, you've got to either get an endorsement from a flight or ground instructor to determine that you're competent to teach the material, or you complete an online or in-person FERC, flight instructor refresher course. Then you can begin using it. Now, even if you're a flight instructor, you should have an AGI. For example, when you endorse someone for a knowledge test as a CFI, you have to keep that record and the test results for 3 years. Doing the same thing as an AGI requires no record keeping. Also, you can become a Gold SEAL instructor if you hold an AGI or Instrument Ground Instructor certificate. The Gold SEAL requires that you've recommended at least 10 people for a pilot certificate within 2 years and 80% passed on the first attempt, and you hold an AGI. And as an AGI, another thing you can do is you can endorse a person for a knowledge test for any category or class. So you don't have to hold it yourself. You give glider instruction. You could recommend someone for the glider knowledge test. But flight instructors can only do that if they hold it on their flight instructor certificate. One last reason to do it is if you ever want to provide ground instruction to first-time initial flight instructor applicants. As a CFI, you would need to have held your certificate for 2 years and given at least 40 hours of ground instruction, or given at least 100 hours of ground instruction in an FAA-approved course like 141. In that case, there's no 2 years required. So if you have had your ground instructor certificate from some time ago, maybe when you became a private pilot, maybe some time has gone by, that 2-year window, that 2-year clock is ticking. So, as much as you couldn't do the flight side of things, you may very well be able to do the ground side, and that is difficult to find a position maybe where you can give 100 hours of ground instruction in an FAA-approved course. So typically, people do need to wait the 2 years and given 40 hours instruction. So your 2-year clock begins ticking the moment the certificate's issued. So if you're like a private pilot and you get your AGI either before or right after that, and you're doing flight instructor training, you may have a year in already on that clock before you become a flight instructor. And one last thing to consider is that you can begin teaching with an AGI. So suppose you could find opportunities to teach before training for your flight instructor certificate at a flight school, for example. In that case, it can really help, significantly help you shorten CFI training time because you're already teaching. And it can provide you with real practice with real students. So that's pretty good. So all good reasons to do it. There's no downside outside of the fact you have to pay for the test. If you're a CFI, you don't need to take the FOI again. You can use your CFI certificate for that. So you just need to take the AGI test. And if you're taking your CFI FIA test, flight instructor airplane test, the test pool is almost identical to the AGI. There are extra sprinkling questions about you'll find multi-engine airplanes, you might find glider, you might find something on balloons or rotorcraft, maybe 5 or 4 questions like that. That's because you're allowed to teach all that stuff, right? Even though maybe you don't know it. You could, but you can do all that. So the test stock is very, very, very close. So you might as well take it when you take the FIA if you can. Otherwise, you got to restudy for the test again. Okay. Well, let's go back up here to I'm reviewing my notes here to make sure I've covered everything today. I think I have. I guess we get to put the brakes on it now. Kind of a shortish one, but not terrible. Gave you some things to look at, right? The ACS, the PTS, sorry, for the sport pilot, and the new ACs, new AC, and there's another AC I should have talked about, which addresses the sport pilots. I believe it's 61.146 comes to mind, and it's about sport pilots and the new privileges. And it's an AC format, so it covers a lot of ground in there. Like one thing it would cover would be what about a pilot who has a higher level certificate? How can they exercise sport pilot privileges with a driving license? Can I let them fly this 182 outside? So that's quite good. By the way, one other last thing we've sort of clarified is that if you have a certificate other than sports, say private pilot or higher, and you have endorsements like for complex airplanes that would cover retractable landing gear, controllable pitch propeller, and the flaps, that you don't need to re-endorse under the sport pilot privileges for retractable landing gear or variable pitch propeller. So that those endorsements still gonna be, you won't need to re-endorse those. So that's kind of good. Okay, well, that's it for this September 2025 video podcast. Another episode done and in the bank. Flight training the way I see it. See you next time. This has been a production of Flight Training the Way I See It. News, tips, and opinion.